Susan, why don't you go?
All right. So, hi, everyone. My name is Susan Spafford, and I'm the executive director of the Cayuga Chamber Orchestra in town, or the CCO for short. And a quick word about the CCO for those who may not know. We are the professional orchestra in town for 43 years now. And we have an orchestra series, a chamber music series. We do a family concert series at the public library. We do a program at the second grade level for all of the elementary schools in the area. And we reach over 900 kids that way each spring, which is looking very different this year, but we'll get to that later. And then we have a number of other sort of smaller programs like our youth concerto competition, our youth orchestra, some other community events as well. And we bring in some great soloists from all over, as well as featuring local artists, which is wonderful to have that resource. And we also have a long-standing connection to Ithaca College. So not only do our orchestra concerts happen at Ford Hall, but we also have a number of faculty members who are in our ranks. We've had a strong partnership over the years between concerts and sponsorships and just interacting with master classes and so on, which has been really great. So there's a strong tie there as well. And then for me personally, I came to the CCO maybe, oh goodness, I don't even remember how long ago now. I first started as a violinist, just as a substitute player when I was a student at Eastman. And then I became a full member. And then shortly after, I became the personnel manager. And then from there, did a couple of other things. And then now I'm the executive director. So I've had my own longstanding relationship with both CCO and IC in Ithaca. So that's just a quick overview of the two.
Wonderful. Thanks, Susan. And Steve or Brett, whoever would like to go next.
Go ahead.
Play rock, paper, scissors.
It's your birthday.
Age before beauty. I'm Steve Nunley. I'm the managing director at the Kitchen Theater. We are a local year-round theater downtown Ithaca. We do about 7 plays during the season, during a normal season, I should say, and a variety of community events, of course, some fundraisers. We have a capacity of 98 in a theater that we rarely do plays with more than 6 characters. So we generally do a lot of smaller plays with smaller casts. And we are currently, of course, not in production.
Right,
Can you hear me?
Steve. Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Brett.
I'm Brett Bossard. I'm the executive director of Cinemapolis, Ithaca's member-supported independent movie theater. We are what is considered an art house cinema. Sorry for the dogs. I have beagles, and they like to make their presence known. What's considered an art house cinema. So we specialize in American independent, international, documentary, and locally produced films. We've been operating here in Ithaca for, well, the Cinemapolis opened in 1986, so 34 years, the last 20 of which we've been serving as a community-based, mission-driven, nonprofit art house cinema. And yeah, just like everybody else, we're not currently open physically, but we're trying to do some creative methods to keep people connected to the art of film. And I'm an Ithaca College alum. I attended the Park School of Communications, graduated in 1995.
Yeah, I should add that the Kitchen Theater was started by 2 Ithaca College students about 30 years ago. We're just moving into our 30th anniversary.
I didn't know that. See, learn something every day. That's really cool. So thank you for the introductions. And I guess you all sort of touched on it. Let's talk a little bit about kind of what's happening in your organizations. I know social distancing has disproportionately hit the arts. And how are you navigating it? And what are some innovations maybe that you're trying that maybe you wouldn't have thought of in a non-COVID-19 world?
Many. Well, the first thing was getting over the shock. We had a play that was going into tech on Friday, March 13th. And, we were on the verge, I guess, of things being officially closed. We were thinking we could get in, we could move through the weekend if we could really rile up our cast because they were getting a little depressed. So on Thursday night, we decided what we were going to do. Friday morning, well, Thursday night, we all went home. Friday morning, we came back and decided, no, we can't do this. We just have to close. So we didn't want to go through tech and not be able to perform. So we stopped the production that day. And then we started to figure out, well, what are we going to do now? You know, we did have to cancel that play. We are just getting ready to put out an official notification that we're canceling the following 2 plays, one of which would have been opening right around now. We started trying, the first thing we wanted to do was to be able to stream one of our plays. And we thought we might be able to do that. We had also, at the same time we closed production here in town, we had a production running up in Rochester, and that production got closed the same week. And because it's a larger theater, we were able to get permission from the Equity, the Actors Union, to stream that production. So they filmed it and it got streamed to the audience that was available in Rochester. We are a smaller theater in the Equity world. We're considered a small professional theater. Those theaters do not have an agreement with the union to do streaming. So we have not been able to get permission to stream anything. So those plans kind of fell through. We've been doing some other online things about read a play and then come into a group that talks about it. We are going to be able to do a couple of fundraisers, which is a special situation with Equity to show. We'll be able to stream it for 2 nights as a fundraiser, which we'll be able to do with one of the productions that we were going to do this year. And we're just trying to have an online presence that keeps us connected with our subscribers, which we always had, but we've done some tweaking. If you go to our website, you can see some things that you can still participate in. Are still participating in. We had a part of a national 1-minute play festival, virtual, where each city had their cast and directors and plays that were produced and then shown online over different nights, which was sort of interesting and kind of an amazing use. We usually do it live at our theater. This time it was virtual. I think I would have liked to have seen the rehearsals for those. But yeah, we're still trying to think of some other things that can just keep people interested until we can open the theater again.
Thanks. Brett or Susan?
Well, for the last, I guess now we're entering, well, we're finishing week 7 of being closed as a theater. That was something that we certainly, we actually addressed at our cinema a few days before Governor Cuomo made it mandatory for movie theaters to close, which actually helped us, I think, in the messaging that we were able to put out to our contributors, to our regular audience members and patrons, and make sure that, you know, that we were being proactive about the safety of both patrons and staff. So we closed on, I think, the 14th of March, and then the big statewide closure happened, I think, on the 17th or on the 18th. So since then, we've been trying to stay in touch with our audiences through email and social media. We, at the start of it, were really just offering up sort of staff picks on films that were available to stream through, you know, a variety of sources online. Typically, we were sticking to the sort of subscription-based services like Hulu, Netflix, and Canopy, and other places like that. So we weren't necessarily promoting that sort of transactional video on demand services. But as things went on, we saw sort of this movement, especially among independent theaters and art house theaters, to try something that we're calling virtual cinema or theatrical video on demand, which we've been doing now for, I think this is week 4 for us. And it's basically an opportunity for the many small film distribution companies that we work with to sort of try to make good on the efforts to make new films available theatrically that they had already started the process of, which is, for people that don't know, you know, the process of getting a film produced is really only the first I would say, third of the life of the film. It really takes a long time and a lot of work behind the scenes to purchase the film, start promoting it, and coming up with a plan to roll it out theatrically. And so a lot of these companies that are very small, even as small as our theaters here in Ithaca, had spent a lot of time to get these films ready for theatrical release, and then suddenly had no theaters to release them to. So we're a very creative bunch, not surprisingly. And so a lot of independent theaters partnered with a lot of independent distributors to offer up these chances for these first run brand new films to be seen at home via streaming platforms, be they Vimeo based, other streaming video on demand services. And independent theaters have been using their resources, which are our audiences. You know, we have direct contact and a very strong relationship with them to promote these films, offer customized links off of our website that make it easy for our patrons to watch them at home and also support the theater directly. So in sort of a reversal of our usual relationship with film distributors, this is a case where, you know, a regular day at the movie theater, a customer comes in, buys a ticket, and a portion of those proceeds that we collect, we remit back to the film distribution company to cover the costs and support the filmmakers. Now that relationship has really been reversed. While we're still having the first interaction with the patron, they're paying the distributors directly, and we're splitting up part of those proceeds after all of the expenses involved with creating an on-demand video platform online, which I'm sure are myriad. And I'm glad that we're not the ones having to deal with creating all that back-end infrastructure. We're just sort of promoting the films, which are still curated by us. These are films we're selecting for our audience, and making them available while we are sort of figuring out how to deal with what it might look like to reopen a theater. So it's one small way. It's really more of an engagement tool. We're not really seeing it as a real significant generator of revenue for the theater. So we still have to be creative about other ways, whether it's grant seeking or other fundraising, to make sure that we can continue to support. Even though the theater's closed, there's still a lot of expenses, including payroll and rent, that we have to deal with on a daily basis.
Thanks, Brett.
For the Cayuga Chamber Orchestra, just like what you've heard from, you know, about theaters and other performing arts groups and so on, you know, of course, all of our events had to be canceled, unfortunately. And we are fortunate in one sense because our biggest expense, we don't own our own venue, we play at Ford Hall, but one of the silver linings for us is that a lot of our overhead, it goes away when concerts go away. So our biggest single expense is paying our musicians. And if we aren't performing, then we don't have that cost. Though I will say there's an exception to that, in that we had 2 concerts scheduled for March. One was on March 7th, right at that cusp when all of this was starting to explode. And we feel glad that we were able to get in that performance, just as Stephen was saying about one of theirs. But it definitely had lower attendance. And so we saw a lot less revenue, a lot less bodies in the seats. But the second concert in March that we had to cancel, we actually did pay our musicians a portion of what they were going to get anyway. Even though we weren't legally bound to, it just felt like the right thing to do. So we do have some expenses, obviously, that we're still having to deal with, things that don't go away no matter how little or how much we perform. But to go to something else that John mentioned, looking forward and just managing what we're doing, you know, we're trying to stay engaged with our audience by offering them some way of interacting with us. And our big premise, of course, is about the live arts and live music. And so we're losing that. But thanks to social media, of course, just like many other groups out there, you know, we're putting out videos of our musicians playing just solo Bach at home or a duet with the person they live with. We're putting out clips from past concerts. We're trying to do some sort of fun presence, just keep our presence there as well on all the main platforms. We've done a couple of radio interviews and broadcasts with our conductor. So we were able to feature something in live time, I guess you could say, not just a recording of something. And so, all these little ways, and of course, email blasts and newsletters, and sort of mixing up our content. Whereas before it used to be, don't forget about our upcoming performance and here's how you can buy tickets. Now it's more about, let us introduce you to some people behind the scenes. Let us tell you what we're doing. Just stay engaged with us. Don't forget about us. And, we'll be back. We'll be back. We just don't know in what form and exactly when yet. So all those little ways, and we get feedback from our audience too that tells us it is making a difference. Obviously, it's not the same as having a concert, but at least it is helping people stay in touch, stay informed. And, I think that's one of the biggest things that we're all dealing with is just how to communicate with everybody, both internally as well as externally with our audience and our, grant sources, letting them know what we're doing to adapt. And that's the other key is the adaptability. So, as John was saying, we're all learning this together for the first time. But I think it will certainly have a long-term impact about how we all start planning for things in the future and making plan Bs and plan Cs and plan G and on.
Truth. So one of the things that I love about the arts is how nimble the arts field can be when it needs to be. And I think honestly, in part, maybe that's a reflection of often being under-resourced and having to be very entrepreneurial. I heard 3 really interesting takes on being entrepreneurial in this environment. And I'm curious, sort of as a follow-up, some of these innovations that you're doing now, are these things that you envision you might keep in the mix when you're able to return to sort of your primary operations?
Well, I will say, first of all, we do live theater. So anything else we do is maybe an adjunct to it, but what we want to be doing is live theater because we think it's that special. In the meanwhile, with the restrictions we have, we're mostly sort of trying to keep our audience connected, which has worked. I'm right now looking at next season and seeing how we can manage things until we can bring back a production crew and actors. I love that our staff is so resilient and has come up with some ideas that have really worked for us. I want the theater to be open.
Absolutely.
The day that we closed and we had a production ready to go, it was one of the worst days I've experienced since I've worked here. It was really rough because, our productions usually rehearse for as long as they run. We do a 3-week rehearsal period for a 3-week or sometimes 2-week run. And for the actors to work that hard and not get to show what they have done was very, very, very sad.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that, Stephen, just as far as the live element and the interaction with the audience and everything being at the core. The one aspect that I will say that I could see us doing more with or continuing on even past when we can start doing live performances again is we've had a lot of interest in trying to do some live streaming of our concerts in some form, even if it's a limited form. And obviously there's a lot for us to look into just as far as the quality of it and, how we would compensate our musicians fairly, which could be, it could stop the conversation right there because we want to make sure we can compensate people. And if that tab gets too high, since we have certain union obligations there, but it's not just for, what's the word I'm looking for? Not just as a stopgap, but also we've been hearing from a lot of our fans who don't live locally and just wouldn't have access to some of this material if we weren't being sort of forced or prompted to put things online more right now. So that might be one way that we see a lasting impact.
Yeah, it's interesting, Susan. That was something that we discovered pretty much immediately as well. Once we started offering the virtual cinema offerings, one of the first people we heard from was actually a retired Ithaca College professor who is no longer in the area, and emailed us immediately saying, I don't have access to these art films where I'm living now, and this is a great way for me to sort of feel plugged back in to Cinemapolis, a movie theater that I spent a lot of decades enjoying, and I can feel connected to it again. So I think for us, that is certainly something we're considering. Obviously, just like both you and Stephen, while film is probably an art form that is adjusts well for the home experience, probably better than live theater and live performance does. Still, what we promote at Cinemapolis is the true and best way to enjoy this art form is communally, and that sort of cinematic experience is something that we feel is really vital to the longevity and livelihood of the art of film. So we want to obviously open it up and be able to hand over the best popcorn in Ithaca to people as they come in, and see great cinema. But yeah, I do think that this virtual cinema, particularly in the first, I would guess the first couple of years of recovery from this pandemic, as many arts arts organizations specifically in our area and across the United States, our audience is made up very, very largely by those who might be greatest at risk, placed at greatest risk by this disease, by this virus. And so I'm guessing, going to have to be very mindful of those members of our sort of core audience that might not be as likely to come back out for a while, for their own concerns of safety. So I think providing, at least in sort of a midterm solution, even after we reopen the doors, some of these virtual offerings is going to be really important to make sure that we're connecting to the people in our audiences that might not feel that it's within their best interest to come back outside and be in a room with a bunch of strangers, even though that's our favorite place to be when we're showing great film.
Thank you. I appreciate those perspectives. So of course, resiliency pertains to artists as well, right? We talked about musicians that we're expecting to perform. We've talked about a whole cast that really at the cusp had to stop something they really poured heart and soul into. And that's hard. And so for students that are in the arts and perhaps we're looking forward to doing summer performance or doing that internship on a film crew or transitioning into their professional career, they face a very different environment. Do you have any thoughts on ways that students in this moment can also be resilient and sort of reimagine themselves, at least for the time being?
Well, one option, or not one option, but just one consideration that I'd offer is that in one of my other roles outside of the Cayuga Chamber Orchestra, I help run a company out of New York City where we go and we take professional orchestras into business settings and show them what makes an orchestra an amazing organization when it's working at its best, how everybody, no matter what field or background or knowledge base or experience with classical music you might have, can learn something from the way an orchestra works. And in the process, they also learn how to really appreciate and respect what an orchestra does. It's not just some magical thing that you either have the talent or you're not. There's actually a lot of hard work that goes into being a musician. And so I guess why I bring that up is because it shows that there are a lot of ways of making a living and adapting what you do and what your degree is in order to actually reach an audience, maybe in a non-traditional way, which a lot of people are going to be forced to do now. And it's not just a matter of forming or following a performance track and an education track or a music and business track. There are lots of different ways of combining these things. So possibly one view that I'd offer is to look at, not just what your goals are or what your degree was in, what your original purpose or goal was, but think about ways, look around for examples and things that you see other people doing that take a different twist Like there were some opera companies that, they were taking opera into schools as opposed to being in a hall. I heard about one theater group that was doing, things in parks, public parks, not exactly a flash mob thing, but, a different kind of accessibility. And of course, musicians are great at finding different venues to play in, doing classical music in a bar, doing crossover music and inviting bands to come join an orchestra on stage. And a great example just fairly recently, was when orchestras started inviting or having screening movies and playing soundtracks. 10 years ago, no one was doing that. And now suddenly everybody's doing it. And that was another way of sort of innovating how you can serve and reach a new audience. So just trying to be creative and proactive, and adaptable, these kinds of keywords that everyone's throwing around these days. I think it can work for individuals as well as organizations.
I see a future collaboration between CCO and Cinemapolis Live Orchestra. That would be fantastic.
We've been trying to figure out how to make it work for a while. Yeah, we're excited. Yeah, I mean, one thing as far as resiliency goes, I do think that one positive that's coming out of everyone being sort of trapped at home and is that there's a real awareness of how important the arts are to people's feelings of fulfillment and livelihood and sort of staying plugged in and sane during all this. And I do hope that, when we get to the other side of it, that awareness continues to have a role in the way that artists and people working in the arts are compensated for their efforts. I mean, I think there is often, especially because things are available a lot of times during this period for free online, it's very easy to go back to thinking that exposure is going to pay the bills. And I hope that there's enough young people who are willing to make the case and stick to their guns that the work of an artist is just that, it's labor, and labor should be compensated. And I hope that we come out of this with both better federal funding and better community understanding of the value of the arts to daily life. It's something that we would be living in a very cold and distant place without the connections that all of the arts are sort of facilitating while we're being socially isolated.
It can be it's been in some ways very gratifying, because we've been reaching out to, this is the time when we do our final appeal, spring appeal, and that went out about the same time as things shut down. But the response we've gotten from audience and subscribers and donors has been quite wonderful in terms of financially for us. But more so, it's what some people realize that they miss and how they talk about what we have done in the past. And that kind of support, it's pretty wonderful to realize that some people are really thinking about what they're missing, and that's stirring them to make a donation, or to, what we've had to do is ask people to donate back tickets that they didn't get to use. And that's been quite wonderful, and sort of really feeling that people really want this to happen. And you don't always know that from day to day, but when you see something like this happen, it's really a vote of confidence. That's very important.
And John, if I could add one more thing too that I just thought of.
Of course.
As I've been looking, just scouring online for emergency relief funds for the CCO, I've found a huge number of grants and funding opportunities for individual artists. And so that may be something that your students aren't fully aware of, because even if they don't have and already have a job, and maybe they're not in a position where they can appeal to an employer or former employer, but if they have a project, or if they lost a gig, or if they just lost actual income because something was canceled because of this, there could very easily be some grant opportunities out there. Some of them are incredibly specific. Like I found one that was only for bluegrass players in Kansas that had a connection to a specific bar, you know. But there are others that are
That is
much
specific.
yeah. I think you have to be left-handed too. But there are others that are much more general. You know, there are ones that are city-specific, but then there are ones that are just for any freelancer who lost a job, you know, and you can submit what it was and how much you would have earned. And, you know, obviously I'm sure there's a long line, but there are opportunities like that out there for people who are, for students, you know, and professionals alike who may have missed out on something because of all the cancellations.
I really appreciate you mentioning that. That's really excellent, and a resource that students should definitely know about. And I think I'm doing this off the top of my head without it in front of me, which is always dangerous. But I think there is an article in the theater arts music community on our website that might touch on that a little bit. And if there's not, I'll make sure that there is one in the next couple of days. But yeah, thank you so much for mentioning that.
Sure.
I'd like to open it up to students for any questions that you might have. We have three very insightful individuals here. So what would you, yep. Michael, you are up.
First of all, I want to thank you all for being present at this panel. It's been very informative so far. My question was in regards to the theater industry. Is there any talk or discussion of changing how rights become available and become distributed, like being able to move performances that were canceled to later dates, or to have looser regulations on being able to record and do things virtually?
Yes, I know Equity has been in discussion with AFTRA and SAG, who sort of rule the world of actors on film and on TV. And some of the larger theaters have contracts that make streaming easier, but there's a whole set of theaters that are part of the union that don't. And the discussions are going on about how this can happen. I heard in the midst of all this that in Great Britain, it's much easier to get rights to stream a performance. And we're finding that it's just not easy to get those rights in the States and for some theaters. And I hope that by the end of this, we might be able to have something that allows us to do it. They've been really strict, and it's very disappointing. And I know a lot of theaters were hoping that they might be able to do something like this to sort of help bring in a little bit of revenue during these times when we're closed.
Thank you.
Fingers crossed.
Other questions? Everybody's absorbing the information. That's okay too. Yeah, Michael for the win.
I have one more where we have a gap. What sort of shows is the Huntington looking to, sorry, not the Huntington, oh my goodness. I'm Boston area, I have local theaters in my head. What sort of plays is the kitchen looking to produce coming out of this pandemic?
Well, I don't know that the kind of plays the pandemic has changed what we want to produce, although I think the season that we started planning was one that was probably a little more emphasis on entertainment. You know, we do a lot of small plays, a lot of new plays, a lot of plays that might have a strong abstract quality to them. And the season that our artistic director, who happens to have worked at the Huntington a few years ago, was to try to get something that had a little lighter feeling to it because of what we're coming out of. So that might be something. And also to try to get something that really would get people into the theater. We try to, we do 7 plays a season, and we try to put a big variety of the kinds of plays, smaller, some newer. Occasionally we can do an older play, although many of the older plays have casts that are larger than we can afford to hire. What we are planning, which actually we're also in the process of welcoming a new interim artistic director, And what we've planned so far, which is a smaller season, might change. I'm interested in seeing what he might think would bring audiences in, but also keep, you know, one of our taglines is, what is that tagline? Intimate and engaging, bold, intimate, and engaging. And we still want to be fulfilling that mission, but also we want to be able to make sure that audiences really want to jump in on everything. It's going to take a little time, so we're not trying to make it more difficult, we're trying to make it easier. But we do some really challenging things. I know in this reading series, which is a series you can read plays, that our artistic director just decided to do a play that she's a little fearful of what people will think of it by just reading it. But I think it'll make the discussion really fantastic. You know, some plays on paper just don't translate, but when you get to talk to them, you sometimes see the potential of what can happen when it's actually staged.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great questions. Anybody else have a question they'd like to ask? Hearing none, then I'll ask our panel, do you have sort of any final insights or words of wisdom for our folks here?
Go
Take that
ahead.
anywhere you want, Steve.
I'm listening. Go ahead. I'm listening. I was just complaining to someone how, you know, I've been working in the office alone. And I guess I didn't think about it, because one of the things I love about working in a theater like ours is a production ends and within the next week a new production starts, and you feel really weird when the set comes down and really excited when the new set starts to go up. And of course, none of that is happening. I walk into our theater, which had a set ready to go, that's sitting there in the dark, all the props, everything ready, and nothing's happening. And that is, I hadn't realized how much I look forward to that part of it. Of course, that's, you know, working where I work in the back, where I'm in the office most of the time. What's really exciting for me is to get into a rehearsal or a performance and see the fruits of my labors, in a sense. And boy, do I miss that.
Thanks. Susan, you look like
Sure.
we're all looking at each other like, is somebody going to speak?
I was hearing something in the background there. I wasn't sure if that was another question coming or not. I don't know that this qualifies as words of wisdom by any means, but what I would offer to any students who listen to this is just, you know, I know it's probably really easy to get very discouraged right now, since there's not a lot that is able to happen according to what you may have planned or hoped or, you know, actually had already decided on. I've heard of people's jobs that they'd been all excited to go get starting, doing, you know, disappearing. Obviously, a lot of colleges are up in the air. But for me, you know, I find great optimism in something that I think Stephen had said, or Brett had said earlier, just in hearing about how much people miss the arts, and knowing that even though things seem really discouraging right now, you know, we will come back in some form. It's going to be different, but I think, you know, so don't start looking at a career change before you've even really started. Wait for a while before you make that kind of a decision. You know, and it's just going to be a matter of figuring out how things fit together in this new, whatever we come out of, you know, in a month or 2 months or 6 months or a year. So I think we all just need to be a little bit patient, but the interest will be there, and people will want performing arts to engage with, you know, just like they have in some form forever. You know, we're more than just a cultural offering. You know, we really do provide a fundamental part of communities, and what makes a community like Ithaca, you know, as I think a lot of people on the tourism board say, you know, a great place to not only live, but work and play and visit and all of those good things. So keep looking for those other resources that are out there too. One specific one that I just wanted to mention in case there are any local Ithaca College students that listen to this is, if you're a visual artist, Community Arts Partnership is actually looking for people to feature. So even now, you know, there are ways for artists to get out there to connect. Even if you don't already have a platform, there are those out there who are willing to give you one.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, and I think just to echo what Stephen and Susan already said, I think that right, their plans were definitely going to be changing, and I think you know, thinking back on my time at Ithaca College, I certainly did not envision 25 years later to be back in Ithaca running a movie theater. That was certainly not the career path that I had thought of when I was, you know, getting into broadcasting after coming out of the Park School. So I think being very flexible and aware that whatever your ideas about the future might be right now, they're going to change either by your decision or by the state of the world. But I do think that, yeah, this current change to the way that we interact with the arts is bound to be a short-term one. You look into historically, certainly theaters and live areas of assembly were very different during the Spanish flu in the early part of the 20th century, just a little over 100 years ago, and yet vaudeville continued, and live theater is still something that people go to, and as is live performance of music, and you know, to a very small degree, there were even movie theaters back then during that period, and they're still here. So I do think that the communal live interaction with members of your town, other people in your community, and the arts all at once is something that's not going to go away. It will change in the short term because of the safety concerns, but this is just like any other virus in that, you know, eventually we will have a vaccine, we will have a herd immunity, and so a lot of these stricter measures, I think, are going to go away. It may take 18 months or 24 months, but you know, in sort of the life of cinema, or the life of theater, or the life of orchestral music, 2 years is a very small blip on a long history of people engaging with the arts. So I think it's better to look at it in that sort of macro way when you feel sort of downtrodden about the prospects of life and work in the arts. I think we're going to be okay, because as we've all said, it's something that people crave and need and thrive on. So there's still going to be a demand when we get to the other side.
Thank you, Brett. I want to thank our panelists for being part of this. Susan, Brett, Steve, thank you so very much. For students, I want to do a shameless plug. And the shameless plug is, well, twofold. One, to let you know that Career Services remains open. In fact, I think I've been as busy now as I've ever been. And we're here to help you. We care about what you're going through, and we are here to help you. We have drop-in hours, we have appointments. Let us know where you need support. Connect with us, okay? If you're staying in the Ithaca community beyond this period of time, support these organizations. If you've never checked them out, check them out. They're all awesome. If you have, and you're already a fan, still check them out, right? And if you're not coming back, at least in the short term, when you're able to support the arts organizations in your home community as well. That's this week's State of the Arts. We'll be back next week with Playwrights Horizons. And if you're interested in last week's, we talked to the Aspen Music Festival, and that is online on the Career Services website, as this will be, because our panelists are awesome and said okay. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having
Thank you.
us.